Hey everybody, welcome. Today I'm going to be making brown butter dark chocolate chip cookies. And this recipe is a recipe I got when I was in culinary school from one of my professors. And so I've had it now for probably about 12 years, and I've been tweaking it, as I like to do. I've changed the proportions of sugar, the brown sugar, the granulated sugar, the proportions of chocolate, the type of chocolate, the amount of leavener, the amount of eggs. And so I think this is a pretty damn good cookie. Most of my friends tell me that it's one of their favorite. I'm a big chocolate chip cookie fan. One of the most basic cookies, but also one of the easiest cookies that people get wrong. And so usually if I go to a bakery, I will usually try their chocolate chip cookie just to see how they make it. And I'm usually kind of disappointed. I will say that my chocolate chip cookie is one of my most favorites. And yeah, so I wanted to share with you the recipe. And so a few things we're going to be browning butter today. And in order to do that, in advance, we need to have a water bath. And so I just have a bowl here filled with some ice. Brown butter is basically taking regular unsalted butter and cooking it in a saute pan or a saucepan on stovetop. And so what we're doing is we're cooking out the water and the moisture from the butter, and the milk solids in it are caramelizing and they're browning. So this is unsalted butter that we are going to brown on stream. This is the finished product. You're wondering what this goopy mixture is. This is browned butter. You can see it's a lot darker. I've mixed it, and so the caramelized dark milk solids are floating around and are suspended in this butter mixture. I browned this yesterday, so it is currently room temperature. Brown butter is usually always kind of liquidy at room temperature. It'll kind of get solidified, but it's nothing like you would see from stick butter. And so you do not want to brown your butter and then start making your cookies. You want to do this step in advance. So the final cookie needs 226 grams of butter, which is basically 2 sticks of butter, which is basically 8 ounces. But because we are cooking out moisture and water from the butter, we need to brown more butter than we're going to need for the cookies. So I have 325 grams here of unsalted butter. That's basically 3 4-ounce sticks of butter, and I'm going to put it in my saute pan. And I'm going to turn this on to a medium-high heat. And let that start to melt down. Brown butter, it cooks for a while, and then when the milk solids start to caramelize and brown, it goes very quick, and that's why I have the ice bath, because I want to basically, once this butter gets to the point where I want to see it, I'm going to immediately take it off and stick the base of the pot pan into the ice bath because I want to stop the cooking. You can easily go from having brown butter to burnt butter. And we used to make these cookies in my bakery, and I would have employees who would brown the butter, and they would be like, oh, the butter's brown, and I'm like, the butter's burnt. And burnt butter is not good. Brown butter is very good. It's very buttery, very nutty, has it's like an intensified butter flavor in a sense. So while that is happening, I'm going to cream my butter and my sugar. So this is my pre-browned butter. This is 226 grams of brown butter that is room temperature. And then I'm going to take my 2 sugars. So most cookie recipes, you're creaming butter and sugar, pretty standard method. Nothing new here, really. I have 85 grams of granulated sugar. And then I have 340 grams of dark brown sugar. You can also use light brown. I like the more molasses depth of flavor here, so I try to buy dark brown whenever possible. But if you can't find dark brown and you can only find light brown, it's not a deal breaker. It's not going to kill the cookie. It is going to be okay. So I have basically my paddle attachments here that I'm putting on my mixer. I'm turning on my mixer on low. And we're going to start creaming the butter and the sugar. This is to add air to it, which will help give some height and body to the cookie dough itself. So pretty standard. Although I sometimes wonder why I do this, because I usually knock down my cookies because I like my cookies chewy. I don't like my cookies crisp, and the only difference between a crisp and a chewy, softer cookie is the amount of time that you cook it. So I usually cook my cookies a little bit on the shorter end because I like soft, chewy cookies. So you can see this butter is starting to melt. It's simmering. I'm going to turn up the heat a little bit. My butters are creaming with my sugar. And then I'm going to take my dry ingredients and then mix them all together to have those ready. So I have 383 grams of all-purpose flour here. I have 5 grams of salt. And I have 7 grams of baking powder. Not baking soda, baking powder. So all my dry ingredients are right here in this bowl now. And then I'm just going to take this whisk and make sure that they are fully incorporated and mixed together. You don't want to skip this step, because if you do, you run the risk of not fully incorporating your leavening agent, and then you will have parts of your cookie that rise and parts of your cookie that do not rise, and they will look kind of bizarre. So, all our dry ingredients mixed right here. Then I have here 64 grams of egg plus 1 egg yolk. Each large egg is about 50 grams, so this is about 2 eggs that I cracked and I scrambled and I just poured it in until I got 64 grams. Then I took a whole egg, separated the yolk from the white, and added the yolk to this portion. So 64 grams of eggs plus 1 yolk. The yolk also helps to make it a little chewy, and this makes it taste really good. So you can see my butter is over here boiling away. I want to keep this moving and stirring it, because the milk solids will start to stick to the side of the pan and the bottom of the pan, and they run the risk of burning too quickly. So you want to kind of keep everything kind of moving around. If it's going a little too quickly for you, just turn your heat down and let it go. So I'm going to crank this up a little bit. As you can see, this is getting nice and light in color. We've been incorporating air into it. I'm going to cut this off and I'm going to scrape down my sides. So I just want to make sure that all the butter and the sugar is fully mixed in before I add my wet ingredients and my dry ingredients to this mixture. So I'm going to turn that back on for about another minute or so. You probably can't over whip it in this stage, but also it's something that you don't want to turn on and then walk away for 30 minutes and just let it go. If it goes a little bit longer, it's fine. If it goes a little bit shorter, it's fine. But you're basically looking for it to get nice and light and fluffy in color. Right before the milk solids get caramelized and brown, this butter is going to start to get really foamy. You can see right now that it's got some larger bubbles in it, but as the moisture cooks out, the bubbles are going to get smaller and smaller, and it's going to have kind of like a foamy top to it. So you're going to want to keep watching that. It's kind of hard to see. You can use a spoon if you like, or you could use a whisk, but it's still kind of hard to see. The milk solids will kind of elude you in a sense, but you are looking for, it's getting there. You can see that the bubbles are getting much smaller and smaller. It's almost similar to cooking sugar. Like when you start cooking sugar, you get these really large bubbles at first, and then as you're cooking the moisture out of it, the bubbles get smaller and smaller. And so this is getting pretty close to brown butter state. Just keep mixing it. You'll see that it's turning nice and foamy. I'm gonna stop this. That is good. And you almost don't hear anything now. You don't hear any boiling. It's still kind of foaming up. But it's not really making a lot of noise. And I can see in the bottom of this, because it's not a lot of butter, that the butter is brown. So I'm going to take it right into this pan and basically stick this on the bottom as such to stop the cooking. So I want to show you, essentially, you can see down in the base there, you see the dark in the bottom of the pan. I'll pour it out into a bowl, and you can see the milk solids that have basically cooked and they're caramelized and they're nice and brown. I'm going to let that sit in there for a little bit and just kind of stop that cooking process. And then so I can help you see it a little bit better, I'm going to take this and pour it into a bowl. Now you're going to have milk solids that stick to the bottom of this pan. Scrape them out as best as you can. Some are going to stay stuck. It's not like super important that you get all of them, but you don't want to leave them behind because that's kind of where your flavor is. Now if you were doing clarified butter, you slowly simmer the butter and then you start skimming off the top of it. So the milk solids come up to the top in a foam and you're skimming those off, and when you're getting clarified butter, you're just taking the fat of the butter and you're removing the milk solids. Browning butter, you want the milk solids in. You can see them in the bottom of the bowl underneath these bubbles. Probably by the end of the video, some of this bubbling might have gone down and I can show you again. But you'll see the brown in the bottom of the bowl. Dark brown is fine. If they are black and they smell burnt, then you've gone too far and you should do it again. But trust me, it makes a big difference in the flavor of these cookies. They're really buttery, really buttery. So here I have my eggs, as I was saying, my 64 grams of egg plus 1 yolk. I have 12 grams of vanilla extract. And then also another secret ingredient in this cookie is I have this coffee extract. It's called Treblis. If you don't have coffee extract, you can also use instant coffee. You could use a teaspoon of instant coffee. Basically, I have right here 4 grams of coffee extract. And what the coffee extract does is it intensifies the flavor of the chocolate. Completely optional, as well as the vanilla. If you don't like it, don't include it. But it makes your chocolatey. It makes your chocolate taste more chocolatey at the end of the day. So I've just mixed in my 3 wet ingredients all together, and I'm going to add that to my butter and sugar mixture. And I'm going to turn this back on low and just get it incorporated. turn it up a little bit. I want to get this nice and mixed before I add my flour, because the flour starts to add gluten. You don't want to overmix once you add your flour, because then you're starting to develop gluten, and then you run the risk of making your cookies tough, and you don't really want tough chocolate chip cookies. So again, I'm going to scrape down the sides to make sure that it's fully incorporated. Get this mixture nice and homogeneous. And then turn it back on and just give it another mix for about 30 seconds to a minute. Make sure that it's fully incorporated. So I've got my dry here. And then I have the most important part of this cookie. It is dark chocolate. So I have about a pound of dark chocolate, 425 grams of dark chocolate. You can use chocolate chips, but chocolate chips usually have emulsifiers. Basically, chocolate chips have these additives so they hold their shape when they're baked. I'm using bar chocolate here. It's more melty. It doesn't have the emulsifiers. So you get a more melty chocolate chip cookie in a sense. And so because of the lack of emulsifiers that make the cookie or make the chocolate melt at much higher temperatures, you get just chocolate in a chocolate bar. And so when this chocolate hits your tongue, it immediately starts to melt. When chocolate has an emulsifier in it, when it hits your tongue, it doesn't start to melt. And so it tastes, in a sense, less chocolatey. I prefer the bar chocolate. It looks nicer in a sense to me, and you just get a more chocolatey chocolate chip cookie. You can use chocolate chips, that's completely fine, but I do stress that you use a dark chocolate and you use a good chocolate chip alternative in a sense. Don't use cheap chocolate in your cookies. You're not going to get a very chocolatey cookie. I eat so many chocolate chip cookies when I go to bakeries, and you can tell when they use cheap chocolate because their chocolate chip cookies don't really taste chocolatey enough. So do yourself a favor. If you're making chocolate chip cookies, chocolate is the star of the show. You do not want to cheap out on your chocolate. This is Cocoa Berry, a chocolate that I've used for many years. It comes in a bar form. It also comes in chips, but I'm using a bar form today. This is a 71% chocolate, and I've mostly roughly chopped it up. There's a few pieces here that I just figured that I would do really quick on camera. You're not doing anything crazy. I have a chef's knife. I have these large chocolate chunks, and I'm basically just giving this a rough chop. It kind of breaks up pretty easily. But I want some smaller pieces to kind of mix into the dough and get the chocolate nice and incorporated, so as I'm eating the cookie, there's chocolate all throughout it. But I also want some bigger pieces of chocolate in this cookie because I actually want to bite in some large chocolate pieces and get a full chocolate flavor. So I like a mix of the two, in a sense, to kind of go through. And so we're going to take this chocolate and we're going to add this in last. You saw me, I almost put it in my cookie dough, which wouldn't have been the end of everything, but technically I want to add my dry ingredients first and then add my chocolate as the final ingredient. So back to my dry ingredients, back to my mixing bowl. I'm going to add, I don't want a big mess, I want to make sure my mixer's back down on low, and I want to add about 1/3 to 1/2 of this flour, baking powder, salt mixture. I used iodized salt. You could use sea salt or kosher salt, but you may want to up the salt a little bit. Iodized salt has very small granules, and it's much more salty to taste. It has more of a salty bite than sea salt or kosher salt. So if you're using sea salt or kosher salt, you may want to up the salt a little bit because sea salt and kosher salt is technically less salty in flavor than kosher salt or than iodized salt. I like to use the iodized salt because it's very small pieces, and I find that it mixes thoroughly throughout the batter a little bit easier, but it's completely up to you which salt you want to use. So I'm just going to turn this on low and let this kind of mix and get almost fully incorporated before I add the rest of the flour. I don't want to mix it all the way and then add more flour. Like, I'm just trying to get some of the flour in there so it's not a huge mess and flour flying up in my face. So that's the rest of my dry. And again, I'm going to turn this on and just get it almost incorporated, because once I add the chocolate, the mixing of the chocolate through the dough is going to finalize the mixing of the flour and everything. So I don't want to mix all the flour and get this to a nice cohesive dough and then add the chocolate and then have to remix it again. So I'm just trying to limit the amount of mixing that I'm doing at this point. So I've got my chocolate. I'm going to reserve a little bit of my chocolate. Maybe about a handful. You can measure this if you like. I'm going to take about, let's say, 60 grams of this chocolate and hold it off to the side. The rest of this chocolate I'm going to add a little bit in, much like my dry ingredients, and I just want to start mixing it. And then I'm going to add some more. These chocolate chip cookies have a lot of chocolate in them. I want a chocolate chip cookie that's really chocolatey and tasty, and so I have upped the chocolate in this chocolate chip cookie. If you want less chocolate, by all means add a little bit less, but I feel like it makes for a very bold statement with this cookie that it's very chocolatey, very buttery, very rich, very comforting. And I'm just kind of slowly pulsing this until it just comes together. And that's pretty good right there. I just want to scrape around again just to make sure, although it looks like it's pretty good, but the dough is forming this nice ball. And here we have our brown butter dark chocolate chip cookie dough. Take the dough. Move this guy out of the way. I'm going to show you this butter again. So you can see in the bottom of my bowl here, that's all the milk. That's all the browned milk solids sitting down in the bottom, and then this is actually just the fat of the butter floating on top. So technically, if you were to drain off the top of this, you would have basically clarified butter, and the bottom is all the milk solids. Milk is basically fat, water, and milk solids in the end. It's made of three things. So I've cooked out the water, I've got the butter, the fat, and then I've got the milk solids left. So the flavor, the caramelly, buttery, toasty flavor is in those milk solids, and that's what gives these dark chocolate chip brown butter cookies a really intense buttery flavor. So if you've watched any of my YouTube videos or seen me make cookies or any of my online classes, you know I'm a big proponent of scooping cookies once the dough is made and letting the cookie dough rest for at least 24 hours in the fridge, or 12 if you really got to have cookies. You can bake these cookies straight from this form to the pan to the oven, but I find that cookies just kind of, the flavors meld better. You know how like spaghetti and lasagna and stuff like that is always better on the second day almost? Like cookies are pretty similar in that sense. So you want to let the flour hydrate and fully absorb all the butter and vice versa, and the chocolate to settle in, and you want everything to kind of like have a chance to relax. You want the gluten that you've developed to relax. You want everything to be nice and jiving. And so like I let my cookie dough sit in the fridge for a day. Like I said, if you really want, you can go ahead and go straight into baking these cookies. You'll notice a difference on the first day if you bake them right after you make them. They'll be very light in color, in a sense. Nothing alarming or anything, but if you were to take them and bake them right after scooping, and then save some and then bake it the next day, you'll notice that your cookies are a lot darker the following day and there on out. So I'm just taking a cookie scoop, which is basically an ice cream scoop. You can buy this on Amazon, you can buy them in Target, Bed Bath & Beyond, you can get them in the grocery store. This is a brand, I got this one on Amazon. This is a brand we use, pretty common in commercial kitchens. They hold up pretty well. I find some of the ones that they sell in the grocery stores are kind of cheap, and I end up breaking that little center part. And so I usually just go with this brand. This is about a 2.5 ounce size scoop. It makes for a good size cookie. If you want them smaller, obviously you can scoop the cookies smaller. But if you want them larger, you can scoop them larger. I've made cookies that are 4 ounces. They're huge and they're a meal in themselves, but it just really depends on what you're going for. These are good for bringing to a friend or as a gift, or if you're just making to eat around the house. If you're wanting something for a cocktail party or something, an event where people are like standing around and eating, and there's not really like a place to sit down and eat, you might want to get like a 1 ounce scoop or a 1.5 ounce scoop. It makes for a cute little chocolate chip cookie. So these cookies, I'm going to scoop them all, I'm going to wrap them in plastic wrap, and I'm going to let them sit for a day in the fridge. After they've sat in the fridge for a day, you can either bake or you can put them in the freezer. I have a food vacuum sealer, so I always seal all my doughs, and it'll keep for months like that. If you wrap them in plastic, they'll keep for up to about a month. Just make sure that they're well wrapped and they're not getting freezer burn. You don't want to serve cookies that taste like they've been sitting in a freezer, basically. These are really nice cookies, and you don't want to negate all the work you've done on the front end to serve somebody a cookie that tastes kind of like a freezer, which is not good. So you can see we're getting to the end of the dough here. And it looks like I'm going to end up with about 20, I'd say about 22 cookies here. Just shy of 2 dozen. Or maybe 21. 21 and some change. Also, if you want to cut the chocolate a little bit and add toffee bits, or if you want to do half dark chocolate, half milk chocolate, that's fine too, or half dark chocolate, half white chocolate. I've done a lot of different things with these cookies. So yeah, it looks like we got about 21 cookies and a little baby cookie. So we had that extra chocolate, that's 60 grams of extra chocolate, these bigger chunks that I kept. What we're going to do is we're just going to go back and stick these big shards of chocolate on the top of these cookies. So when this bakes, you'll see these nice big pieces of chocolate. It'll bake on the top of the cookie, and so it just makes for like really visually appealing, in a sense, chocolate chip cookies. It's just a visual thing. Again, this is optional. You can add all your chocolate if you don't want to go through this step. It just makes them look nice and finished, in a sense. And so I'm just going back through and doing this. Or if you wanted to wait and not do this yet, you can just hold on to the chocolate, and right before you bake these cookies, just let them come to room temperature, and then you can smash the chocolate chunks on top right before you bake them. But I'm going to go ahead and do this now just because I don't want another bowl sitting on my counter with chocolate in it, because I'm probably going to end up eating it instead of baking it. I've got a little bit left over here. Just going to go back and add to the ones that are lacking a bit more. So how do you bake these cookies? This is a half sheet tray. You're going to space them out. You're going to basically put these 3 by 2 on a cookie sheet. If you really want, you could push it and you could do 8. Kind of position it like that. It's going to go in a 350 degree oven. You're going to put it on for 8 minutes. You're going to rotate it and then put it on for another 6 to 8 minutes. Again, like I said, if you want a chewy cookie, bake it closer to 12 minutes and the inside will be really gooey and nice. If you want a crisper cookie, bake it for 15 minutes. If you find that it's browning too quickly, kick the oven down to 325 and finish baking it that way. I like a gooey cookie. So, what do these cookies look like when they're done? Well, they look like this. These are a little bit larger, so you can see I couldn't fit 8 on this because this is actually this is about a 3-ounce cookie right here. And I did not do the chocolate thing on the top. These are actually chocolate with toffee. So I took these, and same recipe, but I added toffee bits to them, so they're slightly different than the other ones, but nice. These have sat for a day in the fridge, and then I pulled them out. I let the dough balls come to room temperature, 350, 8 minutes, rotate it in the oven, another 6 to 8 minutes, and then when I take it out, I kind of smack it down. I don't really like cakey cookies either, and so I smack it down because it kind of deflates them and it makes them nice and full. And so you can see that they're a really chocolatey cookie on the inside, like almost all chocolate. They look really nice. Let's see if I can get that on this camera. It's kind of hard to get, but they're posted many times in my Instagram. And then I will also post some on my Patreon and on my YouTube channel. So without further ado, that is your chocolate. That is your brown butter dark chocolate chip cookie. I'm going to post the recipe on the site, and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you everybody for stopping by today. I appreciate it. Take care.